Hey friends, it is Ask a Flower Farmer Wednesday, and it's your friend Lisa, and you can see I'm a little disheveled here, right? I kind of got tied up on my desk and forgot what I was supposed to be doing. So welcome friends. So this is all about the time that I do my best to answer your questions that are related to flower farming, hobby, home garden, growing cut flowers, business questions, even farm dog questions, y'all. So please bring them on. And the way you ask a question is if you need to post it down below, you'll see a little bubble with a question mark in it. And that is where you need to post your question so I don't miss your question with all the names that are scrolling through. And as always, we totally love it. I particularly love it when you guys post the sunflower emoji, just shouting out that you're one of our students, because that is so important, y'all. I mean, it really, really helps us so much, because as people that are kind of thinking about our courses, any of them, the on-demand or our big school courses, and you know, Dave Dowling's course is like 2 months out from enroll, and it only happens once a year for 5 days, so it's a really, really big deal. When people identify themselves as one of our students, somebody else may say, hey, what'd you think about that class? That helps us so very, very much. So we totally and completely love it when you do that. And thank you from the bottom of my heart, for real. And friends, I'm going to tell you what's happening for me right now, but I want to recommend, if you aren't already checking out my podcast, head over to whatever your podcast app is that you like to listen on, to the Field and Garden podcast. Yesterday, I posted a good one. It's about failed expectations, and it's all about how, and I do this, I'm guessing other people do it too, we get these harebrained ideas that turn out to be really great ideas, but they aren't always built on facts. You know, a lot of times they're built on air of hopes and dreams, and then when it doesn't go right, you feel like a total loser, but you're not, y'all. This is the way it happens. So did a great podcast about that yesterday. I think it's actually called Failed Expectations. So go check that out. And this morning, you may or may not have seen my post on Instagram was about me pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. That I kind of made my little post, and at the bottom I said, y'all, I'm saying this to myself. Totally 100%. If you go read that Instagram, I mean, that was like saying it out loud for me to hear it again. Because let me tell you something, friends. You know, if you don't own a business, you don't even need to listen to this. But when you own a business, and you aren't feeling uncomfortable, squirmy, a little scared, then things are not moving in the right direction. Because in the business world, you are constantly having to change, turn, do things differently, stick your neck out. And I tell you what I have written and sitting on my desk for this time of the year, where I am making a lot of commitments, is I have it written is, you know, trust the process. And that can mean a lot of different things. If you're a farmer, that means that you have to trust that you are taking all the steps to grow a crop that you're going to ultimately be able to sell. In other areas of life and business, you know, if you're a retailer, you know, you have to trust that when you order a huge amount of some product, that you're going to sell it so you can pay for it. You know, there's just trusting the process. Say that to yourself over and over, and just say that. I mean, you have to trust, you have to take the proper steps to make up the steps of what it is you're trying to accomplish, to do your best. You haven't got to do it perfect. And then trust that it's going to take place, because making sure that your process is proper means that you can trust it. And that means that you can step on that process like literally stepping stones, y'all. And I just had to remind myself of that, particularly today. And you just don't be discouraged. If you're feeling really, you know, pretty sassy and comfortable, power to you, but you won't be in business next year if you don't get out of your box, because that's the way the nature of being in business is. So that's all I'm going to say about that, y'all. All right, so again, if you have a question, be sure you post it down in the bubble with the question mark. And that way I won't miss it scrolling through the names. But I wanted to just highlight 4 of the newer seeds that we just got in that I am preparing to start on the farm. And I don't want you to be misled, because if you go to our website, there's not pictures on these yet, because, you know, we try to provide all of our own pictures. That's not always possible, but I have to wait till these bloom on my farm literally to get a picture. But there are 3 new Cosmos. Sensation Mix, which is kind of an older variety, but y'all, I am just so learning how much our market customers absolutely adore Cosmos. And you have to learn when to cut them. Most people cut them too late, and you put them in, you know, they aren't always the greatest in like supermarket bouquets, but there are lots of uses. So the Sensation Mix, and get this one, y'all. Are you ready? A name is very important. Cosmo Afternoon White. Totally love that name. Made me buy it. And it is a gorgeous white Cosmo. And then here's the one that's going to knock your socks. And I have 2 left. The next one's really going to knock your socks off. And the last one is pretty awesome. Is the Cosmo Apricot Lemonade. Holy cow. It is like a white flower with a brush of yellow and a brush of kind of apricot-y color. It is gorgeous. And then the last one, you may or may not even know this yet, that the Queen series of zinnias has come out with a lemon peach. So storm right on over to the Gardener's Workshop and pick these up, because I'm totally stoked. We're in the process now on the farm that we are now also starting warm season. We got our Cosmos, we've got our marigolds started, and some Slosias, and these are on our play card. So let's see what you guys have today for some we got a bunch of questions. And I do want to say at 1 o'clock over on Clubhouse today, I am talking seed starting with soil blocking 101. So join me over there if you want. The directions on Ami say to sow outside. Can these be started indoors? So yeah, Ami is definitely one that can go either way. We always prefer to start inside. I will tell you that Ami Magus is one of those that we only put it on the heat for like 24 hours, a seedling heat mat, to warm it up and to say, hey, it's time to start sprouting. And then we just set it off of the heat, not necessarily under a grow light, just in a room with regular natural light. And ours pop like crazy in 7 to 10 days. We've done it in soil blocks, and I have just, as a matter of fact, just did it in plug trays this year as an experiment, and I will tell you I had much better germination in soil blocks. And it's all about the watering thing, right? So yes, they can go either way. I just saw that somebody said in their comment that they've grown, or they love the apricot lemonade Cosmo. If you have a good picture of your flowers, we would love to feature it on our website. So you can send it to us at the info@thegardenersworkshop.com, because we would love to have an image of that for sure. What is your recommended percentage markup if I'm selling to florists? Do I need to see their proof of resale certificate in order to sell to them? So that's 2 questions. So let's start with number 1. It's not really a percentage that you look at for wholesale. There's actually wholesale pricing that is out. And when you get into professional groups of growers, that's one of the things that people lean on each other for, is to help figure that part out. But there are lists of wholesale pricing from the USDA. Sometimes all those aren't always the most accurate, but you base your florist prices on what wholesalers are selling to florists for. So there's really not a markup. Markup would be what you would base a retail price on that price. So I know that doesn't help you a whole lot. But it's very confusing and it's very difficult for people. And you really have to figure out the wholesale pricing for your region from your sources. Because people ask us all the time for those lists. I cannot give you my wholesale list because I live in the 2nd largest urban area in the state of Virginia. We have premium prices here. Somebody that lives in a rural area or somewhere that's not quite as metropolitan or whatever you want to call it where I am, those prices would be crazy. So you really have to figure that out for yourself. And friends, that's part of building a business. You have to do this kind of stuff. You have to really do the footwork and the homework for that. So for as far as do I need to see their proof of resale certificate? So if they don't have a brick and mortar store, if you're going to sell to a shop and they're in a commercial building, then I don't even think about that. However, if you're selling to designers and freelancers or planners that don't really have a place of business, it is a good idea, even with all of them, just to request a standard operating procedure to request their resale certificate, which we talk about that in flower farming school. This is like just getting your P's in a row. So yes, and the way I verbalize that to people is to the customers is to say, to get your account set up to buy from me, what I will need is your resale certificate, and I want your email, your cell phone number, what's the best time for me to reach you. I have this whole kind of equation that we go through, and that's just part of it. Denise, first time growing hot and sweet peppers. When do I move up to the 2-inch blocker? That's a great question because, so you've obviously been listening to me, Denise, that peppers, tomatoes, eucalyptus, and eggplant are pretty much some of the only ones that I'm thinking of right now that I actually pot up. And the best case scenario is when you know that you're going to be potting something up, like in those 4 cases that I just listed. Once they're about this big and they don't have this massive root ball yet, hanging out of the 3/4 inch, that's when I would do it. So I usually do it when they're about 10 to 14 days old. Then they just grow right on without skipping a beat. If you've waited later than that and there is just a lot of excess roots, I just give them a little haircut, drop them down into that 2-inch block, and they just hit the ground running. So Amy asks, do I pinch snapdragons? So first I need to say, as I always do, that whenever I pinch a branching annual, my method, not necessarily have to be your method, is that I pinch 50% of the crop because I want the best of both worlds. When you don't pinch, you get blooms earlier because that central stem that's growing is the first one to develop a bud, and that bud's going to go on and bloom. If you pinch that central stem off at the appropriate spot, then you are pinching off that first bloom, but you are encouraging branching much earlier than if you'd have waited and let that first central stem go into blooming, then you cut it and the other branches below that just really kick into gear. I want both worlds, y'all. I want early blooms and I want more blooms later. So that's why my kind of standard operating procedure is to pinch half of a crop unless there's some special circumstance, like if there's a tray that's like really kind of getting beyond where I want it to be, but I still can't plant. It's raining, it's still too cold, some craziness like that. I'll pinch the whole tray. So there's the answer to that. And pinching snaps in soil blocks 10 to 14 days before they're going to be planted grew some of the sturdiest transplants I have ever grown in my life. I mean, that's why I pinch and then we wait. We don't plant them right away. You don't want to do a bunch of different things all at the same time. Allow them to recover. And the way that I know that they're recovered is they start their little sprouts where I made the pinch. So could you list some of the perennials that you plant for cutting? That is going to be a really short list. 98% of what I grow are annuals. Biggest bang for your buck are growing annuals. For people like me that are small urban farmers, I have less than 3 acres and my home and buildings are on that. Our cutting garden at the max was only 1.5 acres. And to get the maximum production, we grew annuals. That's how you can produce 10 to 15,000 stems a week. So the perennials that I see that are super important and are worth taking up real estate year round, but they only bloom for a short window of time, are peonies. So peonies are just a great crop. I'm not saying there aren't great perennials to grow. I'm just saying that in my situation, to not have much space, because 1.5 acres for somebody that wanted to grow their business like I wanted to grow my business, you can't do that with permanent plantings of any kind. So my go-to is always what the bottom line benefit is, and peonies were the only ones that fell in that for me. 10.4 acres asks, how long do you harden off spring started cool flowers? That is a really great question. So all seedlings started indoors definitely need to be hardened off, but there are different ways to do it. And for me, when it's cool season hardy annuals, better known as cool flowers, I can do them differently than I do warm season. What I'm about to tell you, you would never do to warm season stuff. So cool flowers, I literally harden them off often out in the garden after they're planted, meaning they are planted. I take them straight out of the grow room, plant them out in the garden, and they are immediately hooped and covered, or actually the hoops are already up and the covers are just laying there. We do that first, and then Bobo plants, and they're immediately covered so that they do not have to fight the wind. The wind is the really big problem with small transplants. So that is an option. So that's the way that I harden them off. And typically, because we're planting cool season hardy annuals when it's cool outside in the very early spring, overheating's not a problem. In the fall, you have to really evaluate your conditions. If it's warmer than you think cool flowers likes, then I would harden them off under the carport where for at least 7 to 10 days, getting them used to wind and some sun, to not have to use the row cover out in the garden because it's still like getting really warm in the afternoon. So you really have to think about that as you're pertaining to whichever planting time you are going for. Cultivating the heart. Do you have a place in your garden for perennial type or self-seeding flowers, and can you speak to that? How do you manage those hours? You are just reading my mind. So I was just thinking about reseeders yesterday. So she's asking, well, I just answered about perennials. I really don't have a perennial area in my garden. However, there are some of the cool flowers that are super strong reseeders. And as a commercial grower, I would never rely on reseeding. I still to this day will not rely on reseeding. Reseeding for a home gardener or a very, very small grower, somebody that's just doing a few maybe subscription bouquets a week and you have other stuff to choose from, this might be I use reseeding as bonuses, not as the actual crop plan that I have. So those cool flowers that are strong reseeders, some of the rudbeckias, not all of them, like Prairie Sun, never ever does she reseed. For us anyway. Some of the rudbeckias, Bells of Ireland reseeds, Buplurum's a reseeder. I'm just thinking Feverfew reseeds. And if I was a home gardener or a very small grower that had really no focus on or had space to designate, to plant all of those in a bed together, not mixed together, but in a bed, and then just say, all right, that bed is going to be the reseeding bed, because I will tell you, it is a mess to keep that bed weeded. You can't really hoe it because they're reseeding it all over the place the second and third year. So that is kind of like a hand weeding, mulching kind of situation. That's why as a commercial grower, you would never even dream about doing that. But that's how I would manage it. I call it the self-appointed garden. And I do some of those out in our native border, like the rudbeckias. We want to reseed because they're so great for native bees and pollinators. And we're not weeding out there anyway. But in a commercial working garden, you have to have better management because you just don't have time to do that kind of stuff, right? So planting them in an area together, saying that's what that's going to be, then to start looking for that stuff in the fall so you can, manage it. But I'll tell you, you won't believe how many weeds come. I mean, it is really a lot of work to do that way. Good morning, Lisa. Can you share what you have blooming for Mother's Day, particularly cool flowers? Cross Blooms is asking. So for Mother's Day, I'm just thinking about the garden. So typically we would have snapdragons, bachelor buttons, poppies, larkspur. Almost always we just miss it. Snaps would really be a big one. Feverfew sometimes. It truly depends when you planted them and what your spring is like. If you have a warm, moist, early spring, I mean, we had a year that we were on Historic Garden Week tour, which is the end of April every year. When Garden Week came, we had been cutting flowers for 6 weeks out in the field. I mean, that's just unheard of. But spring started in mid-March, so you have to really weigh all of that. I'm just totally thinking, calendula for sure, stock potentially if you get it planted at the proper time. Status, I don't think so. The rudbeckias, we typically, for those fall planted, Indian Summer and Goldilocks, I think are the first two, and we could have those. But again, it totally depends on the weather, your skill as a grower, and making them happy. But yeah, we would have, on the good years and larkspur came in, we would have enormous hauls. And I'm sorry, that's all I can think of right on the top of my head. And peonies, that's the other big thing for us. How did you decide to take your planting from hobby to business? What a great question that is. So, I was a gardener and just really, really loved gardening, and literally used to sit on the back porch. This was back before I even had met Steve. I had girlfriends. We had Thursday night was girls' nights at my house because I was the single person. And we would sit on my patio and, indulge in food and beverages and talk about that. Boy, wouldn't it be the coolest thing ever if I could, stay home and garden for a living. And I loved my job. I was the business manager of an animal hospital for like 15 years. And it was a big hospital. 23 employees, multiple doctors. It was super fast paced, intense all the time, and I thrived under those conditions, which is why I can thrive as a flower farmer. Restaurant workers and people that work in high tense situations are the best entrepreneur flower farmers because you don't crumble under the pressure. Anyway, we just talked about it. I then started dating Steve. I then stumbled upon the book, The Flower Farmer, and it was like the light bulb was just going off and off, and, a door after door opened, and Steve encouraged me, and he came with this great piece of land, equipment, dump trucks, tillers, and I could stay home with my dogs. I think I tell that story either in Cool Flowers or Vegetables Love Flowers, or I think portions of it in both of them about how that all happened, and yeah, so it was serious business from the get-go for me. The Mindful Garden. I have some mold growing on my soil blocks. I have fans running. Anything else I can do? Should I be worried? First off, don't ever worry because it doesn't solve anything. You just got to figure it out and fix it. I have never used fans and never felt fans to be necessary, and I literally grow in a closed-in 10 by 10 room. Mold and algae grow because it's moist conditions all the time, which is not the best seed sprouting and plant growing conditions. They should go through the moist to dry in about a 24-hour period, meaning when I water in the morning, I water first thing in the morning, and when I water in the morning, the blocks should be not bone dry, but dry and ready for more water. They should not be moist. There should certainly not be any residue in the tray of moisture from the day before. And when the plants thrive in those kinds of conditions, the algae and mold can't even grow. They can't survive or even develop under those conditions. And it's really easy to induce mold and algae, and I've done it myself. Overwatering, not dumping my trays, and the next morning I come in, they're moist. And I'm like, shucks. That means in about 3 days, something's going to grow on the surface. But you can break that cycle. First off, I have not found it to be a problem. I have had blocks with mold and algae and or growing, and it doesn't really seem to affect healthy growing, but it's the conditions that bring the mold and algae that create the bad conditions for growing. So you can come out of it. What I find is it's warm temperatures, very interesting rabbit hole. So we did a trial this year of starting several cool flowers that that are sometimes difficult for people to get to germinate. Magus, Daucus, Bells of Ireland, things that it's too cold to sow them outdoors at the proper planting time. And they don't always do the greatest in soil blocks. So we did a trial. We started them in plug trays, and we followed the same steps that I used to start Bupleurum in plug trays in the middle of winter to create successions. If you want to know what that is, you got to join my closed Facebook group, The Flower Farmer Show. And it is pinned. The step-by-step instructions are over there because I don't have time to go through it here. Anyway, I did Bells of Ireland that way this year. And I had about 50% germination. Bobo and I were just looking at that the other day. It's like, oh, this is obviously environmentally induced. However, I had to bring in, so those trays have been sitting out on the carport in the weather. They'd already germinated and they were tiny. And so we had to bring them in 3 days ago when this crazy, ridiculous 20-degree nights were coming. And so they're back in the grow room and that heat. And I'll tell y'all that Bells of Ireland popped so fast, not popped, grew so much fast. We underestimate that when you want vegetative growth, when you want the top part of the plant to grow, it takes heat, y'all. I mean, you can't be growing in a 65-degree garage and think that the plants are going to grow. That germinates some cool flowers, but it doesn't grow them after they've germinated. So air temperature, bumping up the air temperature will help your blocks or whatever you're doing. That's one of the big problems of plug trays versus blocks. Plug trays, it's either the top is dry and the bottom is still wet. It's that big mass of soil that's the challenge for so many, which is what led me to soil blocks. With soil blocks, you want them to go through the wet dry in 24, and by bumping up the air temperature, it helps those blocks to dry out. It grows your plants more, and the more your plants grow, the more water they uptake, and that means they'll be drier quicker. And you will soon learn you have to water even more once you have some vegetative growth. So sorry. So don't worry though. Sorry, that was a long rabbit hole, right? Wheeler House flowers. What to do when seedlings stall in the soil blocks? They look fine, just slowing down. Conditions normally are always the cause of that. You don't want plants to stall at all. And I will say that overwatering, like that habit I was just speaking of not getting dried out, is a big one. Air temperature, lack of food, not strong light, so it's just growing environment. So join me at 1 o'clock on Clubhouse, and I'm going to review what the good steps are. And then you have to just step back and look at what you got and tweak something. Something has got to change. Do you always put warm season tender annuals directly on the heat mat? So yes. I use seedling heat mats and a germination chamber. And when they're on the heat mat as they are today, because, a spring wouldn't be spring unless I fried a germination chamber heat element, which I did yesterday morning. And so all the trays that were in the germination chamber are now back on the seedling heat mat, and they are directly on the heat mat. Long answer to your short question, right? How do I put frost covers on the plants without hoops? Hemlock Flowers asks. Okay, so if you have our lightweight row cover, which is Ag 19, it is literally nicknamed floating row cover because it is lightweight enough, except for peppers and eggplant. You can lay the frost cloth right directly on the plants. It's not that heavy for short-term use. And you have to, leave it a little bit loose. But I will tell you, if you're getting a really heavy frost and any precipitation, the heavy frost, you have to know that the leaves touching that row cover are going to have look damage spots. By using hoops, all of that is eliminated. So hoops was one of the best investments I made years ago. I mean, it just revolutionized everything. But if you have you have to use lightweight row cover if you want to put it directly out in the on top of the plants. So this is my last question. This is from Casablanca Flower Farm, and it is: can Lizzianthus in 128 plugs be planted out in the field now in zone 7B or 7A? So Lizzianthus is a cool flower, and we recommend following the cool flower concept, which means 6 to 8 weeks before your last spring frost. I would expect that you're already way past then, and you know so yeah, we plant cool flowers out 6 to 8 weeks before. So I would say that they're definitely hardy enough. Our newly planted Lizzianthus that just went in the ground last week or the week before faced the 20s, whatever we had, with no row cover, and they look awesome. So they're very winter hardy. Wet feed is what takes Lizzianthus out. All right, friends, so we're at the end of our time, and I will be over on Clubhouse, which is it's just an audio social media. You can download the app, join Clubhouse, then join my club, Flower Farming, and join me at 1 o'clock every Wednesday, where I do like a short 15-minute chit-chat about a subject, soil blocking with seed starting today, 101, and then I take questions just like I do here, but you can come up and ask me in person, like we can talk to each other, or you can send it through the back channel through Jesse. So I encourage you to do that. Remember, trust the process, friends. Trust the process. Y'all think that's crazy, but I do sit and repeat things to myself sometimes, especially when I'm when you can get pushed into that little anxious mode about something. You just got to trust your process. Remember to check out those seeds. We have so many beautiful seeds. I just can't even wait for the garden to bloom this year. And thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you over on Clubhouse. And you can find everything I'm talking about over at thegardenersworkshop.com. Ciao, friends.